When it comes to the way we buy, is the future online, offline, or something in between? Hear from the brains behind the first Apple Store, as well as the CEO of the fast-growing online marketplace, Zilingo. In conversation with CNBC's Uptin Saiidi, please welcome to the stage Zilingo founder Ankiti Bose and the founder and CEO of 8 Inc., Tim Kobe.
All right, welcome. So, hi everyone, my name's Uptin Saiidi. I'm a reporter with CNBC. As Casey said, I'm based here in Hong Kong. And if we could have Tim and Ankiti tell us a little bit about your companies, 8 and Zilingo.
Yeah, our company is a strategic design firm, probably best known for work with Apple, as was mentioned, but with many different retail companies from Tesla to Nike to, I guess, many of the big brands.
Okay, so fashion is 4% of the global GDP. It's a $3 trillion industry. Everybody wears clothes. Yet, fashion is still one of the most disaggregated industries with a lot of middlemen in the supply chain. So what we do is we provide an end-to-end cloud platform right from the yarn guy till the brand, cutting middlemen and providing data science, technology, and financial services across the supply chain to make them or help them trade better with one another.
Great. So about 5-6 years ago, the big talk was retail is dead, brick and mortar is gone. Clearly, fast forward to 2019, that's not the case. We're seeing, if anything, just a lot of shifts in retail. So what are the big trends that you're seeing?
I think from our perspective, we're seeing really a transition in the way that products are being presented. But in 2019 or 2013, Mark Andreessen predicted the end of retail. Scott Galloway in 2015 said that it would be the end of pure play retail. And the next year, Amazon bought Whole Foods. So the notion that we're in a world now where we're simultaneously in a physical and digital space is something that we're seeing as a sort of mono-channel type of solution. And we see that really going forward as having a great degree of traction and opportunities.
I think the world today is an inferno of desire, right? Everybody uses Instagram. An average Instagram user spends 53 minutes on Instagram every day, right? So we're constantly triggered by what we see influencers doing, and the way that desire transforms into monetization for brands can be online or offline. I think boring transactions, both online and offline, will die. And really, the margins or the best businesses will be where that experience is great. And there's going to be no online and offline. It's all going to be about the experience. So
what will that look like? I mean, when you say a typical, walk up to the cash register, pay for my goods, that will be dead, you're saying?
Definitely. That'll be dead. More importantly, what I think is going to happen is that do you enjoy shopping for milk and eggs or paying for your electricity? Probably not. But when you're going shopping for, let's say, your sports gear or makeup, you might actually enjoy the experience of trying and buying and then rebuy that online. You actually enjoy that experience both online and offline. So going to the cashier, paying with cash or card, none of that is required. It's about utility. And that should sort of go away from our lives, and we should enjoy every experience that is associated with retail.
Yeah, I guess I would say that the opportunity is really to be able to have the type of transaction in the way that you want it. So the notion that it can be, whether it's in a space that's driving a certain degree of emotion around that product or around that brand, or whether it's something that you may have looked at previously and decide to purchase later, the opportunity to engage with it through mobile interaction will be omnipresent, but also the idea that you can direct where and how you want to receive that product. So whether that's collecting it in a store, collecting it in a Dropbox location, or having it shipped to your home, those are all channels available to you that just will be everywhere. So I think how the store fits into that equation is really what's transforming.
So Alibaba's hummus store, I think there's over 100 of them now in China, and I visited one last year in which you can't enter the store without downloading the app. Everything that you buy in the store, the app will know, and they've set it up in a way that after, let's say, a week after you log into the app, it just says reorder. So it's starting to really get the Chinese consumer familiar with just online shopping, especially the older ones who would never think to order their, like you said, milk and eggs online. And it kind of begs the question of, well, why would I even bother schlepping to the store when I can just hit the reorder button? So that's just one example that we're seeing come out of China. Obviously, Tim, you work with Xiaomi. What are some other examples that you guys are seeing coming out of China that you think could essentially be rolled out and implemented worldwide?
Well, I think China has an opportunity because the payment system is being employed by most people. There's really a much easier integration of platforms that reinforce people's lifestyle choices. And so I think when you see something like an engagement with Xiaomi or with Hema, they're providing you the choice to collect the things as you need them. Ultimately, Hema's in the process of building trust right now. The fresh seafood, the 1,000-year-old fresh markets, those are such a strong cultural tradition. To move from that to being able to trust that company to deliver just as fresh an item as you might choose is going to take time to make that transition. And so we're seeing them really onboarding trust right now as a core component to that interaction.
And how about privacy? I mean, typically, you go to China, you're kind of giving up a lot more privacy than you would in the US, and the customers seem okay with that, right? So in a way, innovation happens quicker. So do you think that the rest of the world, let's say Europe, let's say the US, that will be a barrier to sort of merging the two, online and offline?
It can be. I think the adoption is very fast in China, so certainly the technology moves quicker than the regulations, so that's maybe an advantage. I think the other piece is that you're starting to see more and more information being gathered that isn't specific to violating your privacy. So it's understanding your behavior and offering a better product. So the notion that any brand that has a number of receptors, be they digital or physical, they're able to understand and deliver something more meaningful to you, that's becoming more and more valuable.
Going back to your first question about trends, and I think it's just picking up from what Tim said, I think the most obvious thing that's happening that we can see is that as the per capita income of Asian countries in general is going up, people are starting to spend more and more on categories associated with hope and desire, like fashion and beauty and so on and so forth. Typically, again, going back to China, when China hit 4,000 per capita income about 10 years ago, the first thing that happened was people started spending more on apparel, fashion, and things like that. And there's actually data that proves that when the per capita income increased even further, or when it increases even further, that's when people start spending on aesthetics and beauty and so on and so forth. So the way we think about it is, in the Instagram generation, first you spend on clothes. Therefore, you need a lot of clothes, and fast and cheap, because people don't tend to repeat it. So instead of having 2 or 4 seasons a year, now you have 12. So frequent purchase behavior from that inferno of desire. And then when income goes up even more, what you see is then you want to look like what you look like on your Instagram filter. And that's when you start spending on beauty and aesthetics and so on and so forth. So it's very interesting that the correlation holds true when you map per capita income of Asian countries and spend on fashion and then beauty and these hope and desire categories. So that's definitely one. And secondly, I think privacy, just like he said, I think technology is definitely moving faster than regulation in most countries. And I think the way is to embrace it and see how tech companies and governments can work together on solving for it, rather than curbing or putting any rules and restrictions around what companies can and can't do.
So how does the experience happen, let's say in 5 years right now? Because you said earlier that the traditional days of going to a store and buying are gone, or will be gone. So what will that look like? I mean, what is it that we can't see in 2019 that will be prevalent, do you think, in 2024?
I definitely think that offline is still going to be prevalent, but in a very different way. Like you described your Alibaba store experience, that'll be much more common. You walk in, it's all about the experience. Maybe it's a physical good, maybe it's AR. You experience what it looks like on you. You see what you're not spending time in a queue behind 20 people trying to check out. It's much more about your experience. And then, of course, once the store and the company knows what fits you, what you like, what you don't like. The rest of the process, the recommendations, etc., can come online on your app or maybe somewhere else. But you will go back to the offline experience again because you enjoy it. Right? So it'll be a much more tech-enabled online and offline experience rather than just, again, going back to its utilities versus experience categories. You will likely not go back to experience egg shopping, but there'll be certain categories where you'll really enjoy it and you'll keep doing it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to understand how retail performs, and we always talk about people buy things emotionally and justify it rationally. That's the normal way that people purchase things and engage in things. So when you understand the tools you have available, we're actually seeing a statistical increase in more retail stores in the UK right now, and that's growing because there's been this drop off to a certain degree where e-commerce isn't giving you all the tools to help facilitate the conversions you're looking for, as a retailer. So it's really looking at that total ecosystem. And I think one of the great things about Zilingo is besides the retail ecosystem, it's also the supplier ecosystem. And I think that's a brilliant part of the business, is growing the base of suppliers and activating them through financial incentives to be part of the platform. So it's starting to become, I think, a much more healthy and broader opportunities for different suppliers.
In the same way, we've seen a shift, a sort of disruption in media with user-generated content being able to compete with established media companies. How do you think, let's say, user-generated, or not user-generated, but a random person being able to start her own clothing line in Michigan can now compete with some of the biggest retailers, right? Obviously not to that scale, but they can at least start to sell, and it might seem like a very minuscule thing to an existing brand or multinational right now, but let's say in 2 years, especially with the helps of Zilingo and other companies, it could potentially be a bigger threat. Do you think that it essentially could be like democratized, like retail could be democratized?
100%. In fact, that is our whole thesis. If you think about the United States and you look at the online e-commerce sales, what you'll see is that the large conglomerates, the Inditexes and the H&Ms and the Uniqlos, they dominate the offline, but they don't dominate the online. The online, there's this sort of, think about it as entropy happening from those big brands, the smaller Instagram brands, small influencers, influencers you see on social media, on sites like Poshmark and so on and so forth. They may not even be huge celebrities, right? So it's like the woman that you described, the hypothetical person, could start a store and become successful because suddenly, thanks to technology and financial services, like Tim said, that lady is able to have the economics on sourcing and financing that may not be as competitive as a large conglomerate, but it's pretty close. So at least it's not 500% worse. So suddenly you're using technology to empower somebody who can only source 10 items the same way that a large conglomerate sourcing 1 million items and the economics that they would have around logistics and payments and so on and so forth. By simply using technology to aggregate thousands of these small guys and giving them the benefit of those economics. So we work with over 50,000 businesses and we give them the benefits that the large conglomerates have because we aggregate all of their sourcing demand, their logistics demand, and their payment demand, and then pass on the benefit of the economics to them. And I definitely think it's possible.
And isn't that also on trend with how like fashion is going or has been going, right? Where it's say like in the 90s, Gap, everyone wanted the white shirt and khaki pants in the US, and this, I'm wearing Gap, and then now Gap is struggling quite a bit because people want that sort of, oh, where did you get that? No one knows. You've never heard of them, or it was H&M, but no one ever knows it, right?
Yes, definitely. Also, I think the customer is getting very discerning. They care about where it came from, transparency across, the value chain. Was it made responsibility with responsibility? Was it sustainable? Was it made in a factory where there was full compliance to the law? And customers care about that sort of thing, and things are really changing because of that.
Yeah, I would also add that you're seeing communities form in places that you didn't otherwise ever see them. One of our clients in China is Keep. They're an exercise application. People are joining the application. I think they have 140 million users now. But what's happened is an apparel market has formed within that community of users because the people who share exercise, nutrition, and these other aspects of that community start to get together, and the things they're wearing, people start to become interested in, they start to become sourced, and whether they're getting them from the big brands or whether they're getting from a specialty kind of startup, they're able to actually launch into these communities in a way that people never had access to before.
So do you guys think, we just have a few minutes left, do you think that brick and mortar will continue to evolve into sort of experiential destinations, or do you think retailers and, let's say, startups will use brick and mortar just for pop-up to generate awareness and get some sales? Or, I mean, where do you think the future will look like in the next 2 years?
Yeah, I think bricks and mortar will continue to remain. I think one thing that people maybe misunderstand about stores is they're actually incredible, flexible warehouses, and that stores become part of a distribution chain in the same way that Apple stores, we would have 3 times the product in the back of the Apple stores because we could fulfill online orders from the stores. So it's already a distributed network. Obviously, you can have instant transactions in the space, but you can also fulfill from e-commerce from that site. So thinking of them as just a retail transaction point is also something that maybe is missing some of the complexity that stores will always be able to fulfill.
Completely agree. In fact, a large tech-enabled offline retail distribution network is perhaps the most powerful thing for online distribution, especially in tier 2, tier 3. Imagine a small store that's like a small warehouse that can also deliver to houses, enable hyper-local deliveries and things like that. So I think definitely online and offline will work in conjunction, and brick and mortar will evolve, but it'll continue to be mainstay in retail.
And where is your biggest market right now? The market, your biggest and your most sort of biggest growth, exciting market?
So we, within Asia, Indonesia is our largest market, both B2B as well as B2C. And the US is actually our fastest growing B2B market, where brands and Instagram labels are sourcing from our suppliers in Asia.
And Tim, can you talk a little bit about how, you talked a little bit about China. What about in the US and Europe? Are you seeing your clients sort of be at that level of growth and engagement in terms of evolving their stores?
Well, I think what we're seeing is the emergence of Gen Z market. So with 4x the spending power, this is a group of people who most people remember a pre-iPhone and a post-iPhone world. They've grown up just in a post-iPhone world. So they're not as excited about the technology, frankly, and they find analog things very interesting.
Oh, wow.
And so what we're seeing is a bit of a shift in the value system. Gen Z only cares about technology, it's a bit like oxygen. They only care when they don't have it. So it's not really the same kind of gadget fascination that maybe millennial and older generations have. So as we see that market shift, the types of experiences that you're offering, if they're digital, it's that's ordinary. That becomes very common. And so that puts pressure back on that channel to provide something that's unique and engaging with them.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, with that, we are out of time. Thank you, Ankiti and Tim.
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.